Hi! Okay, this is a long one, so let's just start. Hamlet, the tragedy of. Okay, background. Dating is uncertain. It could be anywhere between 1599 and 1602. This comes from sources at the time, people talking about the play, comparing it to different things, or just references in the play that kind of date it based on when they would have happened and allusions and that kind of thing. One of the basis for the play is this historical figure of Hamlet, of Scandinavian legend, although the trickster revenge plot is definitely old and not new, of course. Revenge tragedy was a sub-tragedy, or sub-genre of tragedy. I know we talked about that last week a little bit with Macbeth. In a revenger's tragedy, of course, something comes along that the revenger must revenge, and it ends poorly for everybody all the time, always. That is the very brief version of a revenger's tragedy. It ends badly for the revenger, perhaps most of all. I don't know. Sometimes other people get really screwed over that had nothing to do with it, or little to do with it. Anyway, it's a bad blast radius. How about that? The Tragedy of Hamlet is one of Shakespeare's most popular plays. It is also his longest, and it's one of his most puzzling, too. A lot of people compare it to a mystery. There are a lot of things in it that are still unsolved today, things we don't have answers to. Was the ghost good or bad? We never find out for sure. You know, why does it take Hamlet so long to enact his revenge? What is the nature of revenge? Is it possible for there to be just revenge? That's something Hamlet himself, grapples with, and there's no definitive answer at the end. Did Gertrude know what she was doing? Was she unfaithful to her husband? All sorts of things that are never ever answered in the play. And then also, Hamlet is one of the most coveted roles in theater. Something to strive for. He's a massive amount of lines, and so many of the very famous lines from Shakespeare come from Hamlet. Certainly. A couple helpful notes as we read, just to make you a little bit more familiar, give you a little bit more context clues, I guess. Hamlet in this play we hear is attending Wittenberg, which was the most intellectually challenging, radical thinking school of the time, and that links him, by the way, with Protestantism and rational thought. It definitely makes seeing a ghost hard to grapple with. Horatio also is a buddy from Wittenberg, and you can definitely tell Horatio's very much of a rational mind. And so you can kind of see that in there too. Now, something not quite well known nowadays that might be helpful is why didn't Hamlet succeed his father as king, right? Well, Denmark practices Tannism, and so that's where the upper echelon of society, of the court, elects a new king. The voters are the most powerful people in the land, yada, yada, yada. They pick who the king will be. So it's not a monarchy. It's Tannism. That's why, or that's not why, but that's how Claudius is king instead of Hamlet, by default. And then a little bit about Hamlet's age. I don't know if you thought about this while you were reading, but the play puts him at about 30 in one edition, because the gravedigger says, well, I've been doing this for about 30 years since Hamlet was little. So it kind of puts him at that age. But there are 3 different early editions of Hamlet. The first quarto, which we call the bad quarto, it was the shortest. It had a lot of, the least like the other 2. There's a strong chance that it was written down by one of the actors and sold that way, not an official version, as you were, as you might say, rather. There's the second quarto, and then there's the one that shows up in the first folio. And the first folio is a collection of Shakespeare's plays published posthumously by his friends as a tribute to him. These 3 versions don't line up necessarily. They don't all have the same text. They differ in different areas, and so there's no telling, which was, if any of them are the original. The ways that plays were handed out to actors, it's certainly different. They would only get their own parts, and so it makes a lot of these ambiguities that abound in the play even harder to solve. Because the argument for him being younger is, first of all, he's at Wittenberg, and the nobility didn't usually go to Wittenberg at the age of 30. That was something that they would do much younger. Second of all, if he's as popular as Claudius, says he is at one point in the play, with the Danish, with the lords, with everybody, then why wouldn't Hamlet have been elected instead of Claudius? And the easiest answer to that would be is if he was too young, if he wasn't quite a man. Additionally, some of the sources also have like Hamlet and everything being much younger, so there's an argument for that. Anyway, the theories go on and on and on. I just wanted to touch on them briefly in case you were wondering. And then, lastly, before we change this slide, this handsome bugger here is John Barrymore as Hamlet in 1922. He's actually the ancestor of Drew Barrymore. And in case anybody doesn't know, the Barrymore family has a long history in the U.S. of producing actors. They're an acting family. Got a little bit of a dynasty thing going on. Our questions for these weeks to consider. Some interpretations conclude that Hamlet is just pretending to be insane as part of his revenge scheme, which is what he says he's going to do. Others say that he actually has gone mad. In your opinion, is he mad or just pretending? Or when do you think he's feigning and when does he actually go mad? Where is the barrier between sanity and madness? I think that's a huge question that the play asks that should be considered. And then who is Hamlet himself? Is he a scholar? Is he a fighter? Who does he consider himself to be? And then additionally, I know I didn't put this in there, but who do other people want him to be? I think is an important question to look at too. All right, things to watch for. You've seen these too, but mice at crucial moments, references to food and digestion, and then things having to do with death. Skulls, maggots, worms, rot, dust, references to any of those things. The photo here is another famous American actor, Edwin Booth, who, by the way, he was the older, better actor, brother of John Wilkes Booth, the actor who killed Abraham Lincoln. Okay, our literary terms for the week. I promise we're going to get to the play soon. These terms are very interesting. They're pretty straightforward in and of themselves, but when you try to search for them in Hamlet, I think it gets even more interesting, and there are multiple interpretations. So, I want you to think what you find the critical discovery to be for Hamlet. What do you think Hamlet's fatal error is? And when do you think Hamlet's situation turns? You could also think none of these are in the play. It's, like I said, Hamlet is a very big, ambiguous beast. But think back on the comedies we've done. Can you spy the Anagorasis in them? I think it's a bit easier than this play for sure. Definitely murky and gray here. Even though Hamlet speaks more than any other character in Shakespeare, he still remains this big enigma. Anyway, just things to keep in mind. Ooh, garage is opening. Okay, so the first scene itself. First, it's worth noting that the very first line in Hamlet is "Who's there?" And the guards mistake each other for enemies. I know we talked in the past about the way that a play opens being important, right? Think about how different this is than Macbeth. You know, when Macbeth opens, we get the witches, we get the storm, we get all this stuff, and when Hamlet opens, it's confusion right from the onset. The guards, not knowing who's there and who's switching out with them, when they should be able to recognize their comrades. There's chaos in the castle, that sort of thing. Anyway, to plow on, because we've got tons and tons to cover, we get talk of a ghost, we get Hamlet's best friend from Wittenberg, Horatio, and then we actually get the ghost. the ghost, first appears and then vanishes and then appears again, and Horatio makes 4 offers to the ghost. 1, do you have a voice? Can you speak to us? 2, is there something you need fixed that I can do easily, that won't be super hard? 3, if you know the future of Denmark, tell us, warn us, because Denmark's preparing for war, there's this big, unease with everybody. And then 4, did you bury treasure? I mean, the last one is just kind of ridiculous. Like, come on, Horatio. Anyway, so then the cock crows and the ghost vanishes, probably using a trapdoor in the middle of the stage, which they called, the under part of the stage, they called hell. So that's a very interesting juxtaposition for the ghost, which leads us into talking a little bit about, first of all, about Ghost as a stock character in this play, and then also just its intentions overall. I alluded and mentioned that the intentions of the ghost are never fully solved in this, but basically, ghosts were recognized by the Elizabethans in 3 basic varieties. The vision of the purely subjective ghost, which is the authentic ghost who has died without the opportunity of repentance. I'm sorry. Let's start from the top of that list. The purely subjective ghost, the authentic ghost who died without the chance for repentance, and then the false ghost who is capable of many types of manifestations. When a ghost was confronted, either in reality or in a play, some, obvious discrimination was called for, and still is. So, to clarify a little bit, I guess, and to dig in a little bit deeper, within the 2 major sects of Christian faith that existed in England at the time, Protestant, which was the religion of the monarchy, and the religion everybody was technically supposed to be, and Catholicism, which was illegal at the time, but England had once been Catholic, and so there were still certainly lots of Catholics in England. But between those 2, there are quite a few differences, believe it or not. And though they seem rather similar overall today, there were really deep schisms at the time. And depending on who was ruling the country, you'd be forced to switch between the 2 or face penalties. Like, okay, well, Queen Mary has been deposed. She dead now. Elizabeth's on the throne. We're back to being Protestants. Like that kind of thing. England was Protestant by the time Shakespeare wrote, because Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth's father, broke away from the Catholic Church and founded the Church of England. So, anyway, that's a much longer story, which we don't have time for. But anyway, one of the differences between Catholics and Protestants is their stance on spirits or ghosts. In the Catholic faith of the time, a ghost could come from purgatory to help repair the wrongs in the world. They would leave eventually if their task was complete, and they could, help people. In the Protestant faith, a ghost was seen to come from hell. They were more sinister in appearance, and they might lie. Their intention was harm. And so, obviously, based on where this ghost came from, that would very much depend on whether or not you listen to it and whether or not you believe it and that kind of thing. And so perhaps that's a big part of why Hamlet is indecisive for a long time in the play. Okay, so the play opens, and we don't see Hamlet for about 12 minutes real time. We see his rivals. We see Fortinbras and Laertes described. We see the ghost of his father, the late King Hamlet. We've seen his enemy, the king, Claudius, formidably in action, marrying his mother. And then we see his close friend Horatio, who's, rational and mature. And then we finally get to see Hamlet at last. Okay, so Act 1, Scene 2, Claudius comes in and basically fills us in on what's been going on in Denmark. Thanks for the backstory, bud. His brother, King Hamlet, died very suddenly, and then Claudius married the king's widow, Gertrude. He also talks about the looming threat of Fortinbras and Norway, which the guards are afraid of as well. Again, the threat of war looms over Denmark, although it's not really fully discussed in the play like it could be. The play is full of so many things that's part of why I'm rushing a little bit today is because there's hardly enough time to touch on all of them. In fact, I had a professor tell me in college once that she was in a class that was strictly devoted to Hamlet, and the professor of hers at the time said, finally, we'll be able to give the play the justice that it needs, the time, the emphasis. And apparently, they got to the end of the semester and they'd only gotten to Act 2, Scene 2. So there's a lot going on in Hamlet, and I hate that we don't have a little bit more time to delve into it. I did, of course, give us 3 weeks, so that should help a little bit. But anyway, we're just gonna keep on going right on past Fortinbras in Denmark and hopefully touch on them a little bit later. Anyway, so Claudius is the new king, and he is trying to keep things upbeat. He's like, Laertes, do you want to go to Paris? You do? Go, do it, have fun. Hamlet, your dad's dead, but now I'm your new dad, so we're closer than ever. To which, of course, Hamlet replies, a little more than kin and less than kind, which is as biting a remark as you can get for your new stepson, I think. Claudius says, why are you so sad still? And Hamlet's like, no, it's not. I'm not sad enough. I am too much in the sun. Gertrude tries to get him to come around and says, don't wear all these black clothes. It's common. Basic. It's too basic. And Hamlet says, yeah, common, which is a very rude comment to your mother. That implies that she is a common whore for marrying his uncle and for doing it so soon after her late husband's funeral. Then Hamlet says, basically, I am far sadder than these outward vestments can express. I just can't, like, you don't seem to understand how sad I am, and how sad I am that you're not sad about this. And then basically Claudius insults his masculinity and his intelligence when he tells him that he's been grieving for too long, and he wants him to be his right-hand man. He doesn't want him to go back to Wittenberg, where he's in school. Hamlet really wants to go back, but when his mother reiterates and says, we do want you to stay here, Hamlet, he says, I will obey you, mother, but not my terrible new stepdad. And then everybody leaves, and Hamlet is alone on stage. And he bemoans and laments and makes comments about how he kind of wishes he was dead. He calls Denmark Eden after the fall, an unweeded garden. And he talks of how he knew his father adored his mother, and for her to wait such a short period of time to remarry. And to his father's brother, of all things, he calls it incestuous. Basically, you'll see the sadder Hamlet gets in the play, the more he blames women for his troubles. Frailty, thy name is woman, is something he says here. But I would take a moment and think, what do you think Gertrude's motivation is here? What do you think her reasoning is? The crown doesn't, automatically pass to the children of Denmark, as we talked about. It's voted on by nobles. So you could make the argument that Gertrude is doing this for her and Hamlet's sake, to have a place in the new Denmark. Perhaps she suspects Claudio. Perhaps she's afraid for her life and for Hamlet's life. And so she quickly latched on, Examine her character throughout the play. What could her motivation be? What makes her do what she does at the end of the play? Maybe it is exactly as Hamlet sees it, and maybe it's not. There are many ways to play it and many different ways to interpret it. Anyway, next Horatio enters, and Hamlet's like, oh man, hey dude, what brings you here? And Horatio's like, your father's funeral? And Hamlet very snarkily says, are you sure it wasn't my mom's wedding? Horatio does, I confess it was, they did come a little close to each other, maybe like within a month. That is a bit ridiculous. But, who am I to say, right? Who am I to say? As he's lamenting his father, though, he says, I shall not look upon his like again. To which Horatio is like, funny you should say that, because I'm pretty sure I saw your dad as a ghost the other night. Hamlet, how does he react? How do you have him play it? This is a man of high reason and high thought, but it's his father. It's a chance to see his father again. His excitement certainly comes across in his words on what he would like. He'd like, take me immediately, show me immediately. So then we quick get a scene about Ophelia and her family. You immediately see how overrun she is by the men in her life. Now, this take is obviously very much based on the changes in which, between the way that women were perceived and treated then and versus now, and how much more independence and freedom they have from the rule of their fathers and brothers. So this doesn't necessarily indicate that these gentlemen think Ophelia is incompetent or anything like that. It's a depiction of the time, but we can definitely see Laertes and Polonius both have a lot of advice for Ophelia on being chaste and how to behave around men. But what might not be apparent necessarily, and I didn't see this in my first reading, I learned this in graduate school a little bit more deeply, is that Ophelia is of lower birth than Hamlet. She's certainly of a wealthy family, but he's a prince after all. So her father doesn't really think that he's serious about her. He thinks that he's just temporarily into her, that maybe he'll use her, leave her deflowered, shamed, and move on to somebody else. And it won't mean anything to Hamlet. It won't do anything to him or his reputation, but it could ruin Ophelia, ruin her future, ruin her prospects for marriage, and that sort of thing. So hopefully that helps to explain a little bit of why these men take that sort of viewpoint for her and give her so much advice about how to behave around her boyfriend. Give me 1 second. Okay, so anyway, on that exact same token, maybe the other side of that coin, I guess, you get the fatherly advice that Polonius gives to his son, which is very different than the advice that he gives to his daughter, certainly. This is very heavily quote, like I've highlighted parts in here that are very famous. Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, and this above all, to thine own self be true. I have a friend who has that tattooed on the inside of her wrist. But how do you feel about this advice? It's very famous. It's quoted as solidly good advice, but Polonius is also not really regarded as a very smart or intelligent character in the play. So how do you reconcile that? There are even people who think that there are arguments to be made, no proof, of course, but arguments to be made that Polonius was a characterization, a mockery of an actual person at the time in the court. And that this was advice similar to the advice he had given his own son. So I guess make of that what you will. But there are some things in here that can certainly be helpful, maybe, but everything's subjective, especially in Hamlet. Okay, so Act 1, Scene 4 through 5. Hamlet does see the ghost. He will not turn back. His friends beg him to stay, and he will not. He darts off and follows the ghost. And here's a terrible, terrible tale. His father's ghost is bound to walk the earth at night, and by day to be trapped in the fires of purgatory until his sins on earth are all atoned for. He says, I'm forbidden to share these horrors with mortal ears, but if I could, they would slice through your soul and freeze your blood. So listen to me. If you ever loved your father, revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. Hamlet's like, murder? Oh, yes, says the ghost. Murder most foul, which is a very famous line in Hamlet. Murder most foul. I saw a pun about killing chickens. I was like, murder most foul. And it made me laugh. So anyway, the ghost goes on and says, murder is always unnatural, of course, but this was particularly so. And Hamlet's like, okay, great, cool, let me at him. And the ghost is like, awesome, so glad you're fired up. Remember how everyone says I was bitten by a poisonous snake in the garden? Friggin' lies. The real snake is now the one who wears my crown. Ooh, and the audience gasped because it was a sick burn. No, because it was fratricide. Fun word of the day. Just like fraternity is a group of brothers. The Latin word root frat means brother. So fratricide is when you murder your brother. Anyway. Hamlet goes, "Oh, my prophetic soul!" AKA, I freaking knew it. My crappy uncle, he's the worst. And the ghost says, "Yeah, he is the worst. Incestuous and murderous. He seduced my seemingly virtuous queen. Ah, she was always weak, it turns out. But the dawn is coming, so I must hurry. Your uncle poisoned me while I napped in my garden, which everybody knows I loved to do. He stole my life, he stole my crown, and he stole my wife. And he killed me in the middle of my sinful life, so I was unable to repent my sins, so I'm stuck in purgatory. It really sucks. You must revenge me, but do not tarnish yourself in the process." What do you think of that? Is that possible? Is that an impossible challenge for Hamlet, telling him to commit murder and keep his own soul clean? Has this ghost put him in an impossible situation, and to put this upon his son's shoulders? But before Hamlet gets any more out of him, the ghost vanishes and tells Hamlet, "Remember me." Hamlet decides here and now to wipe away all other agendas and joys in life and to devote himself entirely to his revenge. Horatio and the others finally catch up at this point, and he forces them to swear that they'll tell nobody of what they've seen. He even tells them, "No matter what I do, no matter how I act, because I'm going to put on an antic disposition, and it's going to be weird, but no matter what, don't you dare give away any hint that you might know why, or even that you'd tell if you could. Not only do I not want you telling, I don't want anyone to know that you know anything." And the ghost is reiterating this whole time. He's yelling, "Swear, swear, swear." And they do, and now it's on. And here's a short little chance for you to read this cute little comic by Kate Eaton, who's amazing, and also who did the other comic. This is Hark a Vagrant, by the way, for the sake of giving credit. Okay. So, Ophelia tells her father that she's distressed by Hamlet's behavior towards her. Says, "My Lord Hamlet is acting mad." Polonius is like, "OMG, madly in love with you." Yes, my daughter's gonna marry Hamlet. I'm sorry I told you all that crap. I'm really excited that he's not just flirting and fooling around. Turns out he really loves you. This is my fault for casting beyond myself with my opinions. Yeah, we're all familiar with that. But anyway, her description of him and his weird behavior is the first that we get of this new antic disposition, Hamlet. This feigned madness he decides to put on to enact his revenge. Okay. Act 2, Scene 2 is incredibly long, and I just called it Many Conversations because that's what it is. That's what it is. Okay. So, Claudius asks Hamlet's boyhood friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to come, and he's like, "Thanks so much for coming. I've asked you here because our Hamlet is much changed of late, and I need you to figure out why and tell me." Now you can play this many ways, right? Basically, he's asking them to spy on Hamlet, but based on the take of the ghost, like, do you think their concern is out of love, like they say it is? Obviously, I think, or it could be that Claudius is worried. You know, what about Gertrude? How do you play her? We've heard Hamlet and his father's opinions of her, but they clearly aren't unbiased. Do you play her as though she's in on it? Do you play her as a sucker? Do you play her just as you know, a caring, worried mom who's just going along with her husband's schemes to spy on her son? What does she know? What does she not know? Think about this as you read for next week. Anyway, messengers, after this conversation ends, and they're like, "Cool, yeah, we're going to go spy on our buddy for you, because you said it was for a good cause." Then messengers return about Norway and Fortinbras, which we haven't touched on, and I said that we would. So here we go. We heard in the beginning that the young Prince of Norway, whose father, the king, also named Fortinbras, was killed by Hamlet's father, who also named his kid after himself. So now Fortinbras the younger wishes to attack Denmark to avenge his father's honor, which of course makes him a foil, a dramatic foil for Hamlet, because they're in a very similar boat. Anyway, the update on him is that their ally, the new king of Norway, Fortinbras the Elder's uncle, so it's like the same story. This is basically like Claudius 2.0. Found out that Fortinbras wanted to attack Denmark and rebuked him. And then Fortinbras the Younger promised that he wouldn't. The king was so happy that at his change of heart and his obedience and all this jazz, that he told him that he could attack Poland if he wanted instead. And that he'd get permission from Claudius for Fortinbras to pass through Norway on his way there. So now you got to do that. Now you got to give him permission because he said that you would. Oh, by the way, they're not attacking you. You're welcome. Claudius is like, okay, cool, I'll answer that letter later. Like when you tell yourself you're going to respond to an email, and then you don't, and you mark it as unread, and you just leave it sit in your inbox. Yeah, that's a thing. Next, it's a conversation with Polonius, who says that he knows why Hamlet's mad. Gertrude is like, I know, it's our quick marriage. He's really just blah about it. And Polonius says, nope, he's in love with my daughter, but it takes him forever to say that. He's a crazy old coot who just repeats himself over and over and says a whole bunch of unnecessary things and goes off on tangents and keeps saying that he'll get to the point, but then, doesn't. Gertrude and Claudius are hurting for this conversation to be over. Finally, he reads a letter Ophelia gave to him that Hamlet gave to her, and it's in its love poetry. It's super cheesy. And Polonius critiques his poem as he reads it. It's ridiculous. How would you like that? Your dad critiquing your boyfriend's love notes to you. That's pretty weird. Anyway, he tells them that he told his daughter to turn away his affections because the Prince Hamlet was out of her league. And she obeyed and rejected him, and now he's sad and crazy. And so they say, okay, well, how do we see if this is true? Well, obviously we hide and spy on him, duh. So Polonius offers to send his daughter to speak to Hamlet, and to hide and report what was said. So they're going to do that. So Act 2, Scene 2 continued. Polonius goes and talks to Hamlet. And he's like, do you know me, my lord? Because he's being crazy, and I don't know, maybe Polonius is talking down to him. Yes, you sell fish. You're a fishmonger. No, I'm not. Well, I wish you were as good a man as a fishmonger, then. Polonius is like, what? You don't think I'm a good man? And Hamlet says, no, only one man in 10,000 is honest in this world. Polonius is like, oh, yes, good point, sir. And then Hamlet jumps. He says, for if the sun breed maggots in a dead dog, being a good kissing carry-on. Have you a daughter? I have, my lord. Let her not walk in the sun. Conception is a blessing, but as your daughter may conceive, friend, look to it. So what is this? He's calling Ophelia a whore? He's calling Polonius a pimp to his own daughter? Polonius is confused and thinks that Hamlet is mad, of course, which of course is what Hamlet wants him to think. And Polonius tries again. What are you reading? Hamlet, words. Yes, what is the matter, my lord? As in, what is the subject of the words? But Hamlet purposefully misunderstands him and asks, matter between whom? And Polonius clarifies, and so Hamlet says, slander, sir. For the satirical rogue says here that old men have gray beards, that their faces are wrinkled, that they have a plentiful lack of wit, etc., etc., etc. All of which, sir, though I most powerfully and potently believe, yet I hold it not honesty to have it thus set down. For yourself, sir, should be as old as I am, if like a crab you could go backwards. Get it? So, you could be as old as me if you could go backwards in time. AKA young as me, because Polonius is older. And he's basically saying, yes, I agree that old men are ugly, but I just don't think that you should talk about it, right? You're old, right? You could be as young as I am if you'd go backwards. Just gibberish, but gibberish with a lot of reason behind it. And Polonius says the famous line, though this be madness, yet there is method in it. Method to my madness comes from that phrase. And then there's a little bit more wordplay by Hamlet at Polonius's expense before he finally says, I'll take my leave of you. And he says, you cannot, sir, take from me anything that I will more willingly part with, except my life, except my life, except my life. So you can't take anything from me that I'm not happy to part with. Saying, yeah, you're not taking your leave, you're making me happy by leaving. And then, of course, he's turning it around and saying, anyway, we have to keep going. Polonius exits. And poor Rosencrantz and Guildenstern enter, and they joke around like old friends do at first, and you see Hamlet's wit against slightly sharper verbal sparrers. He says, what crimes did you commit to get sent here to Denmark? And they're like, if Denmark's a prison, the whole world's a prison. Hamlet agrees, and then adds that Denmark is one of the worst dungeons of that big prison, though. And then we get another great line from the play. They say, why then, 'tis none for you, for there's nothing either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. To me, Denmark is a prison, Hamlet says. And Rosencrantz Guildenstern says, why then your ambition makes it one. 'Tis too narrow for your mind. You're too ambitious if Denmark's not good enough for you, if it's not enough. Hamlet says, oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell, and count myself a king of infinite space, were it not that I have bad dreams. Bounded in a nutshell, and count myself the king of infinite space. It's a great line. Great line. Guildenstern, which dreams indeed are ambition, for every substance of the ambitious is merely the shadow of a dream. They joke around a bit more. Hamlet asks again, okay, yeah, cool, but what brought you here? And they're like, oh, no, dude, we're just here to see you, brah. So, no one sent for you, Hamlet says? You just came on a whim. I'm supposed to believe, like, wait, which one, like, which one is it? Did someone send for you, or did you come on a whim? And they're like, I don't know what you want me to say. And Hamlet's like, I want you to say anything you want, as long as it answers my question honestly. He can see right through them. I know, and he tells them that. And he says, I know the king and queen sent for you. And he gets them, to admit it. He tricks them into admitting it. And then he tells them why. He's like, I know why they sent for you, and I'll tell you. And it's what this is here on the screen. All of this text here. It's one of Hamlet's great monologues, and I think it gets overlooked because of his to be or not to be speech. But it's beautiful, and it's right here because I put it right here. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, foregone all custom of exercises. And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory, this most excellent canopy, the air. Look you, this brave overhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire. Why, it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty! In form and moving, how express and admirable! In action, how like an angel! In apprehension, how like a god! The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me. It's amazing. It's fantastic. He's telling them this is why they are upset. It's because I've not been myself, and I'll tell you why. And he is basically describing the fact that he's depressed, but he's talking about it in these very scholarly terms. He's like, look at this, the phenomenal, magical world, the wonder that is the earth that we live on, the golden fire of the sun, the sky. It all seems like pestilence and vapors to me. How amazing we are as human beings, the ability to reason, the ability to think, our form, our grace. All of these things are being formed in God's image, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, being at the top of the kingdom. And yet, it's all dust, it's all nothing, it's meaningless. Like, being alive does not delight me. And so then they get into this whole thing about, oh yeah, well, don't joke. And Hamlet says, and women delight not me either. That's not just a whatever joke. Anyway, moving on, next slide. Moving on, because we could dwell on anything in this play all day, and obviously I've gone to do that a number of times already. when they finally stop joking around, he asks about the acting troupes that he enjoyed in his youth, and those aforementioned players enter. Hamlet persuades one of them to perform, and to his own chagrin, he realizes that, ooh, I'm gonna sneeze. Ooh, I'm not gonna sneeze. Okay. To his own chagrin, he realizes that he has not put the effort into his own revenge strategy that the actor has put into his performance. And he says, is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wane, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba. There was a speech about Hecuba, as you know, because you read. What's Hecuba to him, or him to Hecuba, that he should, as an actor, should weep for her? What would he do had he the motivation and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty, and appall the free, confound the ignorant, and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. Yet I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal, peak like John o' Dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing, no, not for a king, upon whose property and most dear life a damned defeat is made. Am I a coward? So he's saying this guy can go on and weep and act out something falsely fake. He doesn't actually feel that way about Hecuba. He's acting. But if he had the motivation that I have, knowing that my father was murdered, what could he do then? And what does that mean for me? Because I've done nothing. So these players basically inspire his idea to determine. He's like, so what do I do? He feels stuck, worried about whether or not the ghost is telling the truth. He's still stuck on that, So he discovers in this an idea on how to find out Claudius's guilt, and we see another famous line: "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And also, while we're talking about actors, here's a picture of the very first Hamlet, Richard Burbage, Shakespeare's leading man. He played all the greatest roles. He played Richard III. He played He played King Lear, and he's our very first Hamlet ever. He was possibly the biggest actor of his time, in fact, and he was in such high demand that he played not only for the King's Men, for Shakespeare's company, the one to which that he belonged and was a primary businessman within their company. He also played in other productions for other theater companies. That's the kind of draw that he was. And these kinds of big roles where the leading character, the leading man, had these massive parts were starting to come into vogue, and Hamlet certainly has plenty of lines, as we've said. Anyway, Burbage was said to have become quite rich because he was earning income from being the primary housekeeping of 2 playhouses, a sharer in the King's Men, and a lead actor, as well as a painter. So, good for you, buddy. Okay, then we have the nunnery scene. This is famously called the nunnery scene, and it includes the most famous monologue maybe ever. It begins with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern failing to be able to tell the king and queen why Hamlet is mad and crazy. And Polonius suggests placing Ophelia in the corridor that Hamlet often paces, because of course he's been pacing, in a place where Polonius and Claudius can spy on them, because apparently that's what dads do, and stepdads. And so, of course, Ophelia once more very obediently does what she's told. And then we get to see Hamlet's famous speech. I've included a large number of versions in the 3rd week folder, by the way, to watch. So feel free to watch some this week too, if you'd like. I think it could definitely give you some color and context as you go along. Anyway, so let's start. To be or not to be, that is the question. An incredibly famous line, maybe Shakespeare's most famous line, who knows? But what does it mean, right? So while it's generally assumed that this question that starts this whole thing is about whether or not to commit suicide, to exist or not to exist, like whether or not whether or not Hamlet should kill himself, it can also be argued that it's Hamlet posing a philosophical question very much appropriate for a student of Wittenberg, where Hamlet had just very recently been, and he considers himself very much a scholar in all of this jazz. So it's after he poses the question, it is then followed by a very scholarly analysis of the question. So he's saying, which is the nobler action, suicide or the acceptance of a painful life? Let's debate. He first lists all the attractions of suicide, and then explains the most pressing argument against it, which is, after he describes all of the burdens of life that make suicide so appealing, he concludes that humans don't take their own lives because of fear and cowardice, because they don't know what's to come after they kill themselves, which paradoxically, if you follow his logic, makes suicide the nobler course, because it means that you're not a coward. Also worthy of note is that Hamlet's description of death follows does not follow a Christian tradition of heaven and hell, but the classical worldview, simply an undiscovered country, as he calls it in here, from which no traveler returns, which clashes with Hamlet's own examinations of the ghost being from hell, and prayer saving a sinner's soul, should he be praying, should Claudius be praying while he's dying, which is something that comes up later. So that could lend more credence to this being a scholarly, philosophical question. It could also be Hamlet exploring 1,000 different theologies and outlooks and schools of thought, because he certainly does that, and that's definitely a scholarly thing to do too. Okay, the nunnery scene continued. Then he realizes, at the end of this, he realizes that Ophelia is there. This whole time, there have been 3 people able to overhear him. Does he know this, in the play? Is he aware of them? How does this inform your understanding or your interpretation of his to be or not to be speech? Either way, when he notices Ophelia, or perhaps when he chooses to notice Ophelia, he says, "Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered," which translates to, wait a moment, or hold on, talking to himself, the beautiful Ophelia. Oh, Ophelia, in your prayers may all my sins be forgiven. To me, to many people, that could be a way of saying, oh, forgive me what I am about to do, because he's about to become a giant jerk. And some actors play it straight. Some, like Laurence Olivier, pictured here, very, very famous Shakespearean actor, do a wonderful job of conveying through their facial expressions how painful it is to drive her away, to be cruel to her. At this point in time. So one interpretation of many is that these are 2 people in love who choose to drive each other away for reasons outside of their own desires. Ophelia because of obedience to her father, and Hamlet because of what he knows he must do, which is kill his uncle. So perhaps that's why he begins very civilly here, and then ends up chastising her and all of womankind, as we've talked about, before telling her to get herself to a nunnery. Or perhaps, he's wounded by the return of all of her letters, too. Perhaps it's a complicated myriad of things, like many relationships are, that don't go right. Anyway, he goes on and won't stop. He threatens to leave a number of times before actually storming off. Ophelia is, of course, a mess, and Claudius decides it's definitely not love that's making him mad. He decides to send him on an embassy to England. Polonius then persuades him not to do anything until Gertrude has a chance to talk to him after the play. Let's be honest, he's probably still trying to get his daughter married to Hamlet, which, after that whole display, is actually kind of terrible of him. But, whatever. So, here we have another long scene, and another with a nickname, the play within a play, because, as you know, it's a scene in a play where a scene in a play is performed. So, Hamlet instructs the actors on how to act. He says the play will be inside, so don't do that over-exaggerating stuff, which is just a little joke from actor, between actors, because it will be in, like, anyway, we're gonna get you remember from the first lecture about indoor and outdoor theaters, and so here he's saying it'll be indoor so you don't have to overact. Get it? He goes on, and once more, he won't stop. He just keeps going, just like he was doing with Ophelia. He does it with the actors. Eventually, he finally shuts his mouth, and about acting anyway, and asks Horatio to watch for the king's reaction. He says, Horatio, I admire you. I love you. I love you for your stoicism and your keen, rational mind. I need you to tell me true how the king reacts. And then he goes up to Ophelia and says a whole bunch of crude and cruel things to her, as if he hasn't been mean enough to her, making sex jokes nonstop. If you're Ophelia, how are you feeling about Hamlet at this point, you know? Are you just being polite? Do you still love him? Do you still think, you know, maybe there's a chance for the two of you? What is happening? That's actually probably what Ophelia is thinking. What is happening right now with my crazy boyfriend? So the play within a play goes on, and it's basically a restaging of the events that we've heard of. The old king and the queen are in love and really happy. The king takes a nap in the garden. His brother pours poison in his ear. And when that happens, Claudius stands. People are like, are you okay? And Polonius stops the play, has the players stop acting, and Claudius says, give me some light, away! And everyone but Hamlet and Horatio leave, following the king. Hamlet is like, oh my gosh, did you see it? And Horatio is like, he says yes. Though there's not much of Horatio's opinion on this. Remember, he doesn't know what the ghost said either. But Hamlet is ecstatic. He feels like he has all the proof that he needs. Which also, I completely glossed over. They mention in there, like, oh, the fidelity, the faithfulness of the king's wife and everything. And Hamlet says, my lady, to Gertrude, how do you like the play? And she says, methinks the lady doth protest too much. But she goes on and on about, oh no, I'll totally be faithful, I'll totally be faithful. And this is another famous line because it could be a double meaning for Gertrude. Maybe she's feeling guilty herself. Maybe she's oblivious and it's totally over her head. It's an interesting moment for sure. Anyway, so at this point, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern return to tell Hamlet, that Claudius is furious and that Gertrude wants to see him in her sitting room. And Hamlet gives them all a terrible, terrible time, wrapping them up in puns and word games. And then when Guildenstern tries to play the card like we were friends once, Hamlet says, can you play this recorder? And Guildenstern's like, no, I don't have the skill to play a recorder. And he's like, oh, come on, not even a little? No, I don't even have a little bit of talent for it. And Hamlet's like, okay, cool, well, you thought that you could play me, so you think I'm easier to play than a recorder? Call me whatever instrument you will. You can fret me, but you cannot play me, fool. And it's like, oh, burn! And then he steels himself to go talk to his mother, and he's trying to remember what his father said, which was to leave her fate to God and not to dole it out himself. And says, I will speak daggers to her, but I will use none. To which I say, good luck, Hamlet. And thank you to everybody else for listening. We'll tune into this crazy family drama next week. And with that, I'm going to stop talking for a while.